Pardon me while I have a strange interlude.
There is nothing else. Life is an obscure hobo bumming a ride on the omnibus of art.
Along the misty corridors of time, and in those corridors I see figures, strange figures.
Welcome back, my friends, to the AP Strange Show. Today's show is brought to you by LaVey's Satanic Organs. If you want a good organ sound with a nice groove to it, but one that's perhaps a little bit more blasphemous than most of the organs that you find on the market, go check out LaVey's Satanic Organs. They'll be able to help you out and help you pick the machine for your musical and heretical needs. And on today's show, we're getting a little bit devilish here, and I am happy to talk to the man who is the author of the book Born with a Tale, The Devilish Life and Wicked Times of Anton Szandor LaVey. We're going to be talking about the life of LaVey in this book, and that author is currently the editor of the Toronto Star.
And editor.
He has... I'm sorry?
An editor.
An editor for the Toronto Star. And he has also edited for Spin and TV Guide and Entertainment Weekly. He's written for Billboard, New York Times, Fangoria. He's got a very impressive resume, and I was a little bit intimidated reading all that. But please welcome to the show, Doug Broad.
Hi there.
How are you, Doug?
I'm great. I'm so glad to be here.
Well, I'm glad to have you here, because I came across your book online, and I thought that would be kind of an intriguing read, and I picked it up, and I wasn't wrong. I basically read the book in about a day and a half, because every time I put it down and went to go do something, I'm like, I can go read another chapter. But it is very entertainingly written, so I'm very glad to have crossed paths with you online and discovered this book.
Glad you did too. Thank you.
Yeah. So I mean, I guess like my first question for you with the book is what drew you to LaVey? What was the impetus for writing this biography?
Well, I've always been into weirdness and bizarreness, weird horror movies, science fiction, comic books, monsters, and I mean that's just something that's kind of been swirling all around me since I was a kid, and I had always kind of known who LaVey was. I had maybe seen photos of him, but I never really kind of paid attention to him until the late 80s, when he kind of had this resurgence in like underground zines. And I started, seeing interviews with him and photos, and I thought he seemed like a really fascinating guy. And it always kind of, it always kind of played in my head that maybe I could do something with him. I mean, there were already a few biographies written about him. One was very early on in 1974. Another one was written in the late 80s, early 90s, by his longtime companion. And it was obviously done with his participation. And it obviously is only, one side of the story, but no one ever really did a sort of a deep dive, a deeply reported um, um, biography of this guy who I thought was, as I learned about him, was a real, a real celebrity, for one thing, in the 60s and 70s, and he was a real interesting social figure, and had a lot of interesting things to say. He had a very bizarre background, a very bizarre family life, and I thought it would make a nice, colorful book.
Yeah, and I mean, I don't think you were wrong about that because, as you say, like he's kind of like a cultural force, and he's a presence that's kind of on the periphery for a lot of people. Like they know the name or they know the Church of Satan, and they can picture him if you mention him. But I feel like I've always just kind of had, uh, as with a lot of larger than life figures, there's a balance of myth and legend around them, as well as what can be verified. So you'll read in one book, oh well, he was an organist for the Clyde Beatty Circus, and then another account will say, well, that's not, nobody can really prove that he was with the Clyde Beatty Circus. He's not on their payroll at any point. So it just seems like every little part of his life story is something that you have to take with a grain of salt, especially if the only source is him. You know?
Yeah, and that was something that interested me when I was writing the book. I mean, like you said, there's a lot of mythology behind him, and he self mythologized. He
Yeah.
made up stories about his background. Um, I'm not sure that all of them are made up. And one of the things I tried to do with the book was, to give him a little credit for either doing this stuff, um, or just having the gumption to create this sort of idea that he did do this stuff. For example, he claimed to have been, when he worked in the Clyde Beatty Circus, he claimed to have been a lion tamer. He kind of
Mhm.
rose up the ranks. And later on in life, he actually owned a full size lion that he kept in his backyard in a cage. Um, and that's verifiable fact. So even if this guy wasn't a lion tamer, I mean, he had a lion and
Yeah.
tamed him. So I mean, there's and that's one of the things I wanted to do with the book as well, was to not try to separate all the fact from the fiction, because I thought that would be a really boring endeavor, and I don't think anybody would really want to read that. But you know, I wanted to get at the nature of truth, and the truth for some people obviously is a lie to another, as we're seeing today in our politics. But as you read the front of the book and the back of the book, the beginning and the end. There's anecdotes that kind of really touch upon the nature of truth and what it means to have been born with a tail. I'm doing fake quotes.
Right.
Um, and living this life of this fantastical person, who in some cases had a rather mundane life, but he made it interesting.
Yeah, I mean, he kind of created the life and the kind of cult of personality around himself that he wished. You know, I think you refer to it at some point as like kind of like this carny huckster kind of ability that he had, like a P.T. Barnum ism about him.
Exactly, but he also had this trait that I really admire, that I couldn't do myself, but I try. He was really into pulp magazines and The Shadow and H.P. Lovecraft and horror and science fiction and film noir, and he was actually able to sort of craft this aesthetic, and run with it, and that's how he lived. He dressed the part, he looked the part, his house was painted black. He had, you know real skeletons adorning his living room, and just crazy knickknacks in the house,
Yeah.
and stuffed ravens and other creatures all over the house. So, and trap doors in
Hmm.
in his house, and he lived the part, and that's something that I admire with. I have to admire that with people, that they commit to the bit.
Yeah, yeah, and he made it work. whatever else you can say about him. Because I mean, one thing that came across as a through line for him is that the thing that really kind of brought him joy was music in a lot of ways. Like loved playing that organ and entertaining people when they were in the house. Um, and it seems like he just kind of has this whole thing set up around him as like you said, he's living the life he wants to live inside of this kind of world that he built for himself. Because I mean, his house, I guess, is kind of described sort of like the Adams Family mansion or something like that.
Yeah, and I don't think it's combined with the Munsters, and it's funny because both of those TV shows had come out like a year or two before the Church of Satan was started. So I mean, it
Yeah,
was almost like the culture was primed for a real life analog to those TV
yeah,
shows, and he basically supplied that, and that's kind of how he was able to sort of gather a lot of publicity, and he ended up on Johnny Carson. He did he performed the first satanic wedding in his home, which was also the
hmm
church. So yeah, he was able to sort of parlay his sort of interesting look and lifestyle into a I don't want to say thriving organization, but a real organization that had, you know, real membership, and he was able to parlay that into a best-selling book. He wrote the Satanic Bible, which came out in late '69, I believe, and that's gone on to sell over 1 million copies, which is phenomenal. It hasn't been out of print since it was published.
yeah, yeah. I mean, I remember seeing new editions of that in the bookstore, like when I was younger, and even now, if you go into like a Barnes and Noble and go into their kind of new agey section, they're gonna have a copy there. So, um, yeah. So I mean, he definitely had a quite an effect, and it kind of seemed to me that he was after that kind of publicity a lot, where he was sort of early on always trying to befriend movie stars. Like that seemed like a big deal to him. Of course, Jayne Mansfield is a really notable one. But
Yeah, yeah. When he started the church in '66, in April '66, his whole idea at the beginning was he wanted the publicity, and he admitted this. He wanted to do sort of outrageous things that will get people's attention, and he did. He did the first satanic wedding. He did a satanic baptism of his youngest daughter Xena. He did a satanic funeral, and he got written up all the time. I mean, going when I was doing research, it was insane how many newspapers from all over the world and all over the country were writing about him at that time. Um, so yeah, he was able to sort of parlay all that publicity into this organization, but then he kind of pulled back and wanted to wanted it to be taken a lot more seriously than just like this kind of goofy um, sort of horrific organization. But as you said early on, he wanted to cultivate relationships with celebrities, and also he was kind of a fanboy by his own
right,
he admitted it. He was kind of a fanboy, but he also, even before Jayne Mansfield, who he became friendly with in '67, um, he claimed to have had an affair with uh, a young Marilyn Monroe before she was
right,
really Marilyn Monroe, and he claimed she was a stripper in a burlesque house in Los Angeles, and he accompanied her on the organ, but that has not been proven. Um, but
yeah,
the Jayne Mansfield relationship was real. They really knew each other. As you can read in the book, I think a lot of what went on was embellished. And he claimed to have had an affair with Jayne Mansfield. I have my doubts that had happened. Um,
Right.
but yeah, but they definitely were photographed together. There was a huge photo shoot done at her house, the Pink Palace. And there's some photos from that shoot in the book where LaVey was hanging out with Jayne and her boyfriend and her kids, some of her kids, including
Mhm.
Mariska Hargitay from the Law and Order series. Um,
Yeah.
but yeah, and also Sammy Davis Jr. Um, was a um, was a member of the church. He was given an honorary warlock degree, um,
Yeah.
and I interviewed his publicist from back in the day, who kind of he just poo-pooed the relationship totally. He was like, "Oh, Sammy would meet with anybody. These people were kooks or freaks. They were silly people." It's
Yeah.
fun going back and talking to some of these people to sort of get their views on LaVey, and they
Right.
they knew him. So
Yeah, and well, I had a note about that because this is something I knew about Sammy Davis Jr. and the Church of Satan, and kind of like him checking it out and being interested in it. I think there was something about like he had one painted fingernail or something like that.
yeah, yeah, no. So Sammy was actually he was into Satanism, not
Right.
so much the Church of Satan, but he was into like so-called Satanism in LA even before the Church of Satan was like a big thing. And he claimed that he had gone to an orgy, and the one of the orgy leaders, that like a satanic orgy, one of the leaders was Jay Sebring, who was the hairdresser who was killed along with Sharon Tate by the Manson family. So it
Yeah.
was these weird connections. And Sammy was really into this stuff, and he made a TV movie that he had hoped to go to series called Poor Devil, and he
Yes.
one of Satan's minions. And in the movie, there's a line in the script where Jack Klugman, who plays the soul he wants to, you know, um, grab for to bring him down to hell. Jack Klugman's on the phone and he's like, get me the Church of Satan in downtown, because it was San Francisco based. So
Yeah.
overjoyed, the Church of Satan were overjoyed getting that kind of attention in a primetime TV movie.
Right. And for listeners, if you go on YouTube, you can find this. I haven't watched it yet, but I'm definitely gonna. It's
I have watched it. It's not good. It's fascinating, and it's the production design reminds me of the old Batman series. It's very colorful. It's very
well,
like
and it has Adam West in it, right?
has Adam West in it. Yes, yeah.
And the part that I thought was great was Christopher Lee is Satan in it, right?
And he's actually quite funny.
Yeah.
He's funny in the show because you don't expect him to be funny. So
Yeah, I mean, I wasn't surprised to read that he didn't seem to think very much of LaVey. Uh,
no, no, yeah, yeah, he was not a fan, and because Christopher Lee, having made all these horror movies, was actually very learned, and he knew a lot about the occult just by studying it. But he was like really kind of he was very um, turned off by it. He did not like its
right.
practitioners, and he thought it was evil.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think he kind of saw right through LaVey and he was like, I don't have time for this, um, but I mean, you got Lord Summerisle himself in the role. So, but yeah, I mean, this just seems fascinating to me because, like, what a cast! Adam West and Jack Klugman and Christopher Lee with Sammy Davis Jr. I'm just trying to imagine what that would be like as a TV show if they actually got that greenlit. Like how many different ways they could have gone with it.
You know what? I probably would have watched it.
But because I feel like there was the opposite version of that was supposed to happen several times before, where there was supposed to be a spin-off from the Twilight Zone with like an angel that was being sent out. He
Hmm.
was supposed to help somebody.
That
Um,
sounds like a Highway to Heaven with Michael Landon.
yeah, I guess
That's
so.
what it was
But
about, I think, essentially.
right, but that yeah, but that was less of a comedy. That wasn't the same kind of screwball thing.
Right, right. Of course, of course.
And the Marx Brothers had a show set up where they were supposed to do something like that too. Where Groucho is essentially like God, and he has to send his angels, um, yeah, Harpo and Chico down to Earth on little missions. Um, so there's little clips of that, but I don't think they ever even did a full show because I think Chico got sick pretty shortly after that. But
Mm.
um, yeah. Yeah, I mean, as far as like movies and TV goes, I mean, that was another one of those like myths or one of those things that LaVey wanted people to believe was that he was in Rosemary's Baby. Um,
He was not. He claimed early on, I mean, he saw Rosemary's Baby, and that came out only a couple of years after he started the church. And he was like, he was thrilled. I mean, I've read letters that he's written to people saying how much he thought the film sort of painted Satanism in a good light and showed that um, there are people like the people in my church, in the Church of Satan, who are out there. All these older people in the Dakota apartment where Rosemary and John Cassavetes, or Mia Farrow and John Cassavetes lived. He was like, "These are my people." So he was really happy about the movie, and he pushed it on everyone, saying, "You've got to see this." And he also claimed to have sort of helped Ira Levin, like, or inspire Ira Levin to write the book. Um,
yeah,
but yeah, I actually found and interviewed um, the dialogue coach for Rosemary's Baby, this guy named Howard Koch Jr. And he's gone on to produce tons of, great classic movies. But this is one of his early jobs, and I asked him, point blank, I mean, did LaVey have anything to do with this movie? He's like, absolutely not. It's all BS. I mean, it had that kind of response had kind of trickled through, the LaVeyan lore throughout the years, but I needed to get someone who was on the staff of the movie to definitively say no, he was not involved. So I trust this guy. So I think it's safe to say he was not involved.
yeah. And I mean, I think that's been suspected by a lot of people that he was just kind of inflating that,
But they,
or just making.
but still, I'm sorry to interrupt you, but still, it's like you in his obits when he died in '97. Major newspapers were putting in that he played the devil in Rosemary's Baby. It's like no one bothered to check these things. They just threw it in there because he said so.
Yeah, I mean, you got two sources that say that happened, and you don't bother to check further than that or ask around.
Hmm.
uh, so, I mean, I guess that's a cautionary note for people doing research via newspapers. Is sometimes journalists just use whatever's available, and they don't have time to fact check everything. Uh,
Well, it's funny you say that because I mean, as I say in the book, there was an article written about LaVey in '92 for Rolling Stone by Lawrence Wright, who's a Pulitzer Prize
mhm.
winning journalist, and it's a piece that LaVey was not happy with um, because um, Lawrence Wright kind of poked a lot of holes in the mythology, and even interviewed his father, found his father, and interviewed LaVey's father. Um, but as he poked holes into a lot of these, claims that LaVey had, he still perpetuated some myths as well. He said that LaVey was married to um, his his common law wife Diane, but they were never really married. Um,
Hmm.
so yeah, so he, even the even a lot of people who are trying to, you know, poke the myth end up reiterating some of the myth.
Yeah, I mean, it becomes such a tangled web anyway with somebody like LaVey that sometimes the more mundane things, like whether or not he was actually married to Diane, it's like you don't bother with that so much because you're focused on other things. But
Exactly, exactly. And it's funny because I interviewed his son-in-law, Nicholas Schreck, who um, has there's no love lost there. He
right,
does not like his former father-in-law. But he told me, and he said, the guy was interesting on his own. Why did he have to make all this stuff up? And that's kind of something that I think comes up in the book, maybe between the lines as you're reading it. It's like this guy is really fascinating, and he's an interesting guy and he's really smart and funny. Why did he feel the need to make so much of this stuff up? But it makes his life interesting, and I think it makes the book interesting.
well, yeah, and to continue perpetuating it even when he was getting older and he had nothing was really happening at the Black House anymore. Like people weren't going there, and you know, um,
Yeah,
so
as he told Lawrence Wright, he said, this is my legacy. This is what I'm living for. It's like, why are you taking away my memories, or why are you taking away my history?
yeah, yeah. I mean, I don't. I kind of feel like that might have been some kind of insecurity on his part, where he wanted to always be hidden. I mean, you use a couple quotes right at the front of the book, little epigrams there related to masks. As yeah, so I mean, like the black pope of the church of Satan is just kind of this mask that he needed to wear, to
Yeah,
insulate himself, I guess.
yeah. I mean, that was something that it struck me when one of his friends, this guy Marcello Truzzi, who is a sociologist and an expert in Carney and you know a lot of the stuff that we're into, a lot of the
Yeah,
stuff your show is about. This is what this guy Marcello Truzzi was into, and you know even he said that LaVey kind of wore a mask, and I think he kind of misquoted George Orwell and George Orwell is one of the epigrams in the front of the book. He wears a mask and his face grows to fit it. So the idea is that he wore this mask, he became this character, but he eventually kind of really got into it and believed some of it and made himself believe it.
right. Yeah, I mean, I think that's a danger for anybody like adopting a persona is that you start to kind of believe your own bullshit after a point. And you can't discern one from the other anymore.
But that's
As much
exactly
as
Yeah, that's exactly what a lot of or a number of journalists who I spoke to for the book, I interviewed for the book, who had one-on-ones with LaVey said that. He said, this guy started believing his own bullshit, and yeah, I don't know how much of it he believed. I mean, there are those who will argue that he was a total believer and he believed in the devil, and he did not believe in a devil. He believed in the devil as a metaphor, as
right,
it's something it's a figure or a figurehead in this case. It's just something to not to worship, but to sort of take his advice and live out your carnality and unleash the beast in man. That was kind of his whole philosophy of the church was just do what you want to do as long as it's not hurting anybody else. It was very kind of libertarian, and live your life to the fullest. And that was kind of his credo.
Yeah, and I mean, I think a lot of people, especially some of the journalists early on that talked to him, there was that one guy that was actually part of the satanic wedding um, publicity stunt there. But
Yeah.
a lot of the people that kind of met him early on would take a look at what his actual philosophies were, and they'd say, "Well, I don't really see anything wrong with it." It's just like I don't find anything to disagree with here. It's not evil. He's not actually worshiping a devil. He's
Yeah,
just
he's not telling you to sacrifice babies. And it's funny because if you read the Satanic Bible, I mean, there is a lot of kind of, nasty speechifying, and there's a lot of authoritarian leanings in it, but
Mhm.
there's some really kind of funny common sense, pieces in there. There's a lot of essays in the book, and throughout his life he wrote he wrote dozens of essays, and they're very logical, they're very smart. Some of them are very mean spirited, but he did have a philosophy, and it wasn't, we must obey the great Lord Satan and kill people on his behalf. So he got a bum.
Right. Yeah. Well, I mean, unfortunately, I think because of the time and place, he gets conflated with Charlie Manson and the Manson family. Um, and it wasn't exactly the same place, but it was happening around the same time. And I think one of the Manson family girls was attended the Church of Satan at least once, and she kind of got booted out because she was on drugs or something like that, right?
Yeah, he during his kind of publicity phase early on for the when he wanted to get the word out about the church, he produced a topless review at
Oh yeah.
a club in the North Beach in San Francisco. It's kind of this sleazy topless bar area, the red light district of San Francisco, and he produced this show with you know topless vampire women and an executioner with an executioner mask, and um, the woman who played the vampire was Susan Atkins, who was a go-go dancer, and a member of. She later became a member of Charlie Manson's family. Um, she got wigged out. She dropped acid, I think, the first night of the show, and she didn't want to come out of her coffin.
Hmm.
And she said that she later claimed that her relationship with the Church of Satan was something that sort of, you know, poisoned her mind and, led her down this bad path of, you know, being a murderess. So it's, yeah, there's, as you can see in the book, there's a lot of interesting sort of uh, you know, cross pollination between these kind of out there organizations.
Yeah. I mean, it's funny too because for being kind of right in the middle of a lot of counterculture stuff and being an iconoclastic figure himself, it's funny that he seemed to be pretty anti-drugs. The
Yeah, he was.
Satanists were pretty much like teetotalers in that respect.
Yeah, he was not a hippie. I mean, he was a bohemian, but he wasn't a hippie, and he had real disdain for hippies and drugs and people like losing control, losing their minds. Um,
Hmm.
he did allow alcohol, and he drank himself, but only he preferred that people drank in moderation during his rituals and during his parties. He had a lot of parties. Um, but yeah, he was kind of he was very conservative, like law and order, anti-drug. Um, that was his bag.
Yeah, and I mean, I think it goes along with how you were describing his philosophy was. you can't really go out and do what you want to do if you're not in control of your own mind, so to him it was like people letting themselves go with inebriation was just kind of doing themselves a disservice because they're not actually doing what they want to do. They're doing what the drugs are making them do.
Yeah. Yeah.
But but yeah, I mean, I guess the shadow of the Manson family murders kind of affected him and sort of like plagued him throughout his whole life, even though he had really no direct connection with it or
Yeah.
even similar philosophy. you know?
Yeah. I mean, he brought out this kind of almost acceptable Satanism, and it was almost like a playful Satanism. Um, he was he there was an excerpt from his second book, The Complete Witch, that ran in Cosmopolitan magazine, and
Right,
he had a cover line on Cosmo. So he was like, and he was on Johnny Carson, like I said, and he was on the cover of Look magazine, and Time magazine wrote about him, and Newsweek wrote about him. So it was seen as kind of a benign sort of occultic endeavor. But then, the Manson family came along and spoiled everything, because then you know, their murders were considered satanic and ritual. And as soon as you get those words out in the ether, and they just get conflated, and he's kind of being painted with that same brush. And
right,
that bothered him, obviously. But it wasn't until really the satanic panic in the 80s where it really did a number on him and the church, when
right,
um, all these daycare um, centers and schools for kids, like nursery schools, were being accused of you know uh, sexual, child sexual abuse and mutilation and all this other nonsense. But it was called satanic, so of course it had to be connected to the Church of Satan, which it wasn't.
right. And during that time, you also had the rise of talk shows, both on TV and radio, where it seemed like LaVey was a less active participant at that point, and he was letting his daughter Zena and Michael Aquino make a lot of those appearances. But
Hmm.
um, but yeah, I mean that's definitely something I remember from when I was young, is like kind of seeing Michael Aquino sitting there. I think it was Phil Donahue or Oprah, probably both.
And also Geraldo.
Yeah, yeah. Geraldo was the big one, I think, because he had a tendency to be extra sensational.
Hmm.
um, but uh, but yeah, I mean, at that point, it's almost like uh, Aquino and Xena and also Nicholas Shrek were kind of being more the spokesman for what was happening.
Yeah, definitely. Xena and Nicholas Shrek. In the case of Michael Aquino, he had already split from the Church of Satan in like 1974, 75, and
Oh, okay,
he was still active as a Satanist, but under his own umbrella rubric. He was the Temple of Set, he called it. It was
right,
his own kind of offshoot of the Church of Satan, because he early on he was a member of the Church of Satan. He was in fact LaVey's kind of right hand man, um, and did a lot of administrative work. Um, uh, Edited the Cloven Hoof, which was the church's kind of um, newsletter organ, house organ. And when he split from the church, because he was angry that LaVey had said that he would start selling um, degrees, like warlock and witch certificates.
oh, right,
um,
yeah,
and basically, people had worked very hard to sort of move up in the organization to hit that level. And LaVey said, this is a money making opportunity, and we should take this money if people want to be a witch or a warlock. So that was the last straw for Aquino. He split off, and he was a real believer as well. He was a true believer. He believed in the devil. He claimed that the devil came down and told him to write this document, which became, you know, the basis for the Temple of Set. So he would go on these talk shows as a like as a Satanist, but not really connected to the Church of Satan.
Right, right. Yeah, because well, as you say, I think he was kind of more of a traditional occultist, where he really believed in the magical elements of it, and the hierarchy and the secret society aspect of initiation and working your way up through degrees. Where for LaVey, it was just kind of like, um, well, as with the example of Sammy Davis Jr., like, hey, we like you. You want you want to be an official priest of the Church of Satan? Here you go. Like, he was pretty fast and loose with ranks um, degrees within the organization.
Well, it's funny because one person I was very happy to be able to talk to was this guy named Richard Lamparski, who was a friend of LaVey's um, early on in the 60s. And Lamparski was famous for writing a series of books called Whatever Became of. And there were these basically like 200-page books, a whole series, basically updating all these like faded stars, Hollywood stars, movie stars, TV stars, what they're doing now. And a lot of them were, a lot of the stories are very, very sad. But that was his thing. And he'd heard about LaVey in San Francisco and wanted to meet him because he thought like, oh, this guy's looks like he's interesting and he's new. He's not an old timer.
Right,
They struck up a friendship, and I think from what Lamparski told me, he thinks that LaVey was very into, like you said, cultivating celebrities, and he tried to see if Lamparski, with all of his connections, could bring some of those, bring some of that stardom his way. But he and Lamparski had a falling out, and Lamparski said to me, essentially he tried to get me hooked into the Church of Satan, and I didn't want to do it. He said it was essentially a boys' clubhouse. That's what he called it. And some other people said some other things to me. Nicholas Schreck said it was an old man in his house. That was the organization. I mean, a
right.
lot of it's, obviously, it's coming from uh, a negative place. But the idea that it was kind of a clubhouse is not too far off the mark, because the church started, or even before the church started, LaVey would have these lectures in his house where he would put ads in the newspaper. And he would talk about cannibalism, werewolves, all these esoteric, occultish topics. And he would charge people $2.50. They'd come in, sit on folding chairs, and he would regale them with stories. And he had people there all the time, like throughout the week. And can you imagine inviting strangers into your house to sit there and
Right.
listen to you lecture? I mean, but it became a lucrative thing for him. He was able to make money off of it. So when people say that it was kind of a clubhouse, it kind of was at the beginning. And I think as it expanded, it became something a lot more. Um, but yeah, I just the evolution of the church is just a kind of a fascinating continuum.
Yeah, and then of course, if you have like a secret passageway that leads to a little bar area, like man cave with some mannequins in it.
Exactly. He had oh God, why is the name escaping me right now? Um, the Den of Iniquity. I
Yeah,
got Yes, where he had these he set up these mannequins, you know, that that were posed in provocative positions. Like he had one kind of drunk floozy who was, sitting in a puddle of her own pee with her panties down, and he had like a Boy Scout with an erection. I mean, he had all this kind of crazy, these crazy uh, like human companions, like not inhuman, humanoid companions, um, that were down there and just made him happy. It was like, that was his. I guess some people like model railroads, and slot car racing or whatever it is, and he liked to collect, you know, mannequins and make them look odd.
Yeah, I mean, well, I mean, yeah, that and playing the organ or just watching movies. It seemed like when he got older, when people did come to the house, they would just kind of hang out and they'd either like listen to him like hold court and tell stories or play the organ, or sometimes he'd just watch old movies with people because he loved like old horror movies and stuff. Yeah.
Yeah, and after the Satanic Panic kind of, really put a target on the church, he kind of checked out, and he he lived in the house, and he didn't really like to leave the house, but he had a lot of people come over, and he liked entertaining people. He would just sit at he had a bank of like nine organs, or nine keyboards in his kitchen, and he would just perform you know, for people who came over, and he'd do like 3 hour sets, and with no sheet music in front of him, just playing from memory. And I interviewed a bunch of people who were there for these private concerts, and they were like, "This guy was a maniac. He was amazing. It was like,
Yeah.
you wouldn't believe, what this guy could do." Um, and he was obviously, like you said, he was into showing movies, and watching movies. He had a lot of favorites. He collected old Hollywood scandal magazines. One guy interviewed told me that he kept them in like pristine condition in like plastic, and he was a collector. He was a nerd. He was kind of like
Yeah.
a horror nerd, like all of us are. And I don't want to speak for
Right.
your listenership, but I would imagine many of them are, and it's not
Yeah.
disparaging because I am proudly one as well. Um, but yeah, that's kind of what he enjoyed doing in his later years. He just cultivated a lot of younger friends, people who discovered him like I did in the 80s and 90s. Um, and he also was very attractive to a lot of rock and rollers like Marilyn Manson. You know,
Mhm.
he was one of Manson's idols, and Manson wrote a lot about him in his autobiography. Um, and there were a lot of like young writers and fanzine people and musicians who just became friendly with LaVey because he was a really entertaining old guy who was into the same kind of stuff that they were into.
Right. Yeah, I mean, it seemed like he was kind of ahead of the curve in a way where uh, he was appreciated more by that generation, and to the point where he had a bit of a revival where they were recording him and cutting records for him, like in the '90s, or making these little zines based on him and stuff like that. Yeah.
Yeah, that all kind of came about because he was he was being shot for a fashion shoot for a San Francisco magazine called The Nose. It was a kind of a satirical news magazine, and they did a fashion shoot with LaVey and ran an excerpt from one of his later essay collections. And the woman who set up that fashion shoot, her name was Becky Wilson, who I interviewed. She was roommates with this guy named Greg Turkington, who is probably better known now as he's a like alternative comedian. His name is Neil Hamburger. He tours and does
Yep.
shows. Anyway, so Turkington was knew who LaVey was and was really kind of into LaVey. And when he found out that Becky had just set up this photo shoot, or styled this photo shoot, he was like, "I got to meet him." And they met, and they became very friendly. And uh, Turkington was really, he was putting out records, his own like little indie records in San Francisco, and he said, maybe we can put out some of your music. And LaVey, was initially a little hesitant, but then he was like, "Yeah, let's see what we can do." And they did a recording, and it sold, and LaVey made some money off of it, and then they went on and they did a record, and it's kind of a really sweet story in the book because you see how this relationship is being built on mutual interests, with a guy in his 60s or almost 60s and a guy who was much younger. And Yeah, it's just kind of it's an interesting story, and those records are still around. You can still buy them on you know on eBay. So and I
Yeah.
advise you to look them up. They're really entertaining. I mean, it's organ music, but knowing who's making the music it's kind of part of the appreciation, just knowing who the artist is.
Yeah, I mean, that's exactly the kind of thing I would collect just to have it in my collection. It's just because it's such an oddball thing. But I mean, as you alluded to, he was really talented. I mean, I was or the one section where somebody had mentioned a song from the 30s or something, and he kind of remembered it, and then within a minute or two, he was playing it
Mm,
from memory, or he just figured it out. It's like I've known musicians like that, and that's a real it's a real special skill if you can just if they say any requests and they mean it, like really any song you can come up with. If they've
yeah,
heard it before, they can do it.
that
So
was something that so many people who listened to his playing told me that you could just shout out any obscure, like you know pop or jazz or country song, and he would know it, and he would play it for you. So yeah.
yeah, yeah, it's it's pretty amazing stuff. Um, all right, so I would be remiss. We kind of talked about some of the movies and things, but I would be remiss if I didn't talk about the Devil's Reign. I feel like
As you can imagine, that was one of the most fun parts of the book to write because I took a really deep dive into that movie.
yeah, I mean it's a wild movie. So I mean for people
Well,
that haven't seen it, it's like you got evil Ernest Borgnine, you've got William Shatner, a young John Travolta before anybody knew who he was really.
it's an amazing cast. It's actually kind of a boring movie. I mean, it's just kind of slowly paced. And I actually I watched it again, obviously for when I was writing the book. I was amazed at how beautiful it looks for a crappy '70s like B movie. It's really nicely shot. It's
Mhm.
really well done. Um, but yeah, he actually, despite not having nothing to do with Rosemary's Baby, he did have something to do with other movies along the way. Um, and this one in particular, he got a big credit on. It was made with the participation of Anton LaVey, founder of the Church of Satan, and he was on the movie posters. And he's actually in the movie as is Diane, his companion. Um, he has a speaking role. He utters like two words, and you can't see half his face because it's covered in a golden mask. He has a golden kind of helmet mask on.
Right.
But the movie was, it got a real release. It made a little bit of money. Um, it was famous because it claimed to have the most horrifying ending of any movie ever made, and it's essentially 10 minutes of people being exposed to the devil's reign and melting, and their faces start melting into like these rainbow puddles. It's kind of
Yeah.
gross, but really phony. Um, but yeah, so I take a deep dive into that movie and write all about the production, about his what he brought to the movie in terms of some of the set decoration. Was his ideas, and some of the dialogue, the rituals. He had a huge hand in putting those together. In fact, some of the rituals were taken word for word from the Satanic Bible and the Satanic rituals. So, yeah, it's uh, yeah, it was a big movie for him.
Yeah. What I find mystifying about that movie is that none of the scares are played for scares in the movie. Like the moments that are supposed to be scary, they don't shoot it or have the music in a way that's going to make you jump, or just like you said, it moves slowly because um there's almost no dynamics to it. There's no shift to it. You're just kind of watching it all play out.
That's exactly it, and it has kind of a TV movie-ish quality, like a '70s TV movie-ish quality. Although with '70s TV movies, they kind of had to have those like shock moments because that's when they had to cut to a commercial. So you at least
Yeah.
have those little moments. This was, 90 minutes of just almost like a nonsensical procedural drama without any real legitimate scares or it was just it's a very awkwardly made movie, and it's surprisingly so because it was made by this guy, Robert Fust, who directed these two brilliant Vincent Price movies, The Abominable Dr. Phibes and Dr. Phibes Rises Again.
I
um,
love those movies.
yeah, so it's this was not one of his better movies, although when you like I said when I looked at it again after not seeing it for many years, there's a lot to like about it. It's just not very good.
Right. I think the madness of it in general, just people would have to watch it once. If you like any of this, if any of this sounds appealing to you at all,
I mean,
definitely.
just the cast. I mean, William Shatner is William Shatner, and at his Shatner-esque his Shatner-esque best. And Tom Skerritt of all people is in it, and it's got
Oh yeah.
and Eddie Albert from Green Acres. It's bizarre.
Um, uh, did you interview Shatner for this, or did
I
you
did
get a
not.
quote?
I writes about no, I wasn't able to get him, but he writes about the movie in his book, and I was able to use some of that. Uh,
Yeah.
so it was yeah, I was able to get more people than I expected participated in the book. And in fact, I reached out to Marilyn Manson. I had his email. I reached out to him and told him about the book, and I was writing it because I know that he was a huge fan of LaVey's. And he said he would have loved to have been involved, but at the time he was going through some legal problems, as we all know what those
Right.
were.
Yeah.
And he on a on his lawyer's advice, he thought that it was not a good time for him to talk. So
Right.
unfortunately, and I appreciated that. I understood that, but there some people came through and some people didn't. But I was happy with who I spoke with.
Yeah. I mean, speaking of that, you spoke with Jacques Vallée, right?
Yes. Well,
Yeah.
I didn't speak with him. Okay, I'll tell you this story. So Jacques Vallée came up in a lot of um, pieces about LaVey, and even in Blanche Barton's book, The Secret Life of a Satanist, the biography of LaVey. And I never really knew who Jacques Vallée was, and I read up on him, and this was a guy who Steven Spielberg based the Francois Truffaut character in Close Encounters on Jacques Vallée. He was a big ufologist, a UFOologist. I don't know how to pronounce that, but he was really big into UFO.
Yeah.
And
I always just say ufologist. It's
ufologist.
easy. Yeah.
Thank you, ufologist. And so I read up on him, and I saw that he had a few books where he actually writes about his relationship with LaVey. So I read that stuff, and he had a lot of interaction with LaVey, and I emailed him. I found his email. I emailed him cold, told him what I was doing, and he agreed to answer questions via email. So he gave me some good stuff, and yeah, I was very happy with that.
Yeah, I mean, I think listeners to my show, a lot of whom are ballet fans, will be happy to see. some of that in the book because it's kind of, commentary that he hasn't necessarily written elsewhere because it's in direct response to your questions. He almost gives like kind of a really interesting psychological profile of LaVey.
He does, and that's the beauty of reaching, of finding some of these people who knew him like very early on, who could look back and say like, well, this is what I really thought about him. I was able to I was led to another guy. I emailed a San Francisco musician who had a contact with LaVey because they sort of played lounge organ in the same circles, and he didn't really have much to give me, and he admitted that he didn't really remember a lot, but he said you should talk to this guy, and this guy turned out to be this older gentleman who is probably the world's foremost Wurlitzer organ maintenance repair person. This guy is world renowned for maintaining these tremendous organs, pipe organs. And he gave me the guy's number. I called him. He's probably in his I would probably say mid to late 80s at this point. But his mind was like, he was clear as a bell, and he just remembered everything, and he was very frank with me about what he thought about the Church of Satan back in the day. And but he really liked LaVey, and they got along well. They were pranksters together, because he said LaVey was the real deal in terms of being a musician, and he knew these organs, he knew keyboards, and that's how they kind of connected. So it was fun discovering these people who have never spoken about LaVey, who were totally kind of in the background, but they were there when all this was happening.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, the people you were able to track down and talk to. I mean, of course, a lot of them are no longer with us. Like Michael Aquino had passed away a couple of years ago.
Yeah.
But
Oh, and I'll tell you an interesting story about people passing away, and it was really kind of devastating to me. And I I'd reached out to his grandson, LaVey's grandson, Stanton, who I guess he's in his early 40s. He was in his early 40s, and um, a number of years ago when I worked at Spin Magazine, we did a profile of him because he was kind of like, he was a real kind of mover and shaker in the Hollywood industrial goth scene. So we did a story about him, a profile which was really like weird and funny and crazy. And I reached out to him, to tell him I was writing this book, and I'd love to talk to him. And he was like, "Sure, certainly, let's make a date." So we made a date. I guess it was 2 Decembers ago to uh, to talk via Zoom, and I sent him a Zoom link, and he never showed up at the appointed time. So I emailed him and I said, sorry you couldn't make it, but let's try to figure out another time to do this. And never heard back from him. And then like 3 days later, I get an email from a mutual acquaintance who's also in the book telling me, "Did you hear about Stanton?" I'm like, "No, what?" Like, he died. I'm like, "What?" He's like, "Yeah, he died 3 days ago," which was the date of our interview. So he died the same day we were supposed to talk. And it was just like, well, that's weird. That really bothered
yeah,
me. I mean, and I feel terrible. I interviewed his widow, who was very, very kind, and um, she spoke to me for the book. But yeah, that was really kind of that was kind of devastating when that happened. But yeah, and like you said, a lot of people just aren't around anymore. So it was. I also would have liked to have spoken to Diane, uh, Diane, who was his it was his second longtime companion. He was married very, very early on. Then he was with Diane for like 22 years, and then he was with Blanche, who was his third companion, until he died. But
Mhm.
Blanche actually responded to questions via email as well for an interview, and she was amazing, and I was so grateful for her. She was very candid with me. She's still, she's still a Satanist, and she's into it. But she's she's a brilliant woman, really smart, and just really fascinating. Had a lot of interesting things to say.
Yeah, she kind of took over the cloven hoof administrative kind of stuff too toward the end there, right? She
Yeah.
was running all that. Um, and speaking of death, I was gonna say that I mean, when he died, it just seemed like there was a lot of conflict between her and Diane and Xena, like everybody involved, where just kind of stuff went out of the house, and I guess a lot of it nobody really knows what happened to it, or it ended up in a dump somewhere, you know. So
Yeah, when LaVey died, there was just it was just a mess because he was estranged from Xena, his youngest daughter, and Xena's half sister Carla was still sort of involved, and she actually lived in the Black House toward the end for a bit. Um, but when he died, there was like a mad scramble for who gets what and who takes over the church and who gets this, who gets that, and so it was just a sad situation. And Blanche was very candid to me about her side of what was going on. I had reached out to Xena and Carla, and neither of them participated. Um,
right,
I did speak with Nicholas Schreck, who was also involved in that as well, and he gave me his side of the story. So it was interesting, talking to these people and trying to piece together what exactly went on during that time. Because at one point, after he died, um, Blanche and her son, they had a young son um, named Satan, and Satan Xerxes. They called him Xerxes. Um, they lived in the house, and after LaVey died, they were able to live in the house for a while at the largesse of this guy named Donald Werby, who owned the house at the time. He was a friend of LaVey's, and eventually, they were evicted. Um, so when they had to leave the house, all the stuff from the house had to leave with them. So there was this real chaotic scene of all of the stuff being removed from the house, and it was supposed to go into storage. Stuff was breaking. Some of his like rare '78 records that he collected were like you know thrown on the ground and stomped on, and even
yeah,
Nicholas Schreck told me that he went into the house and he kind of destroyed the ritual chamber. I mean, he took he there was no love lost there, so he just did his curse and did some destruction. And it's a shame because I'm sure there were some relics in that place that were just you know phenomenal and irreplaceable. The
yeah,
thing that was very kind of that came out of that was very beneficial to the book was that you know LaVey kept everything, or Diane, or whoever it was administering to this stuff, kept everything. So everything was packed in like these legal boxes and stacked. And so many of those boxes were actually just basically taken out and put on the street. And they ended up going to various places. A number of those boxes um, were taken were I think they were purchased by a guy who worked in a Berkeley bookstore, and those boxes contained um, letters, correspondence between LaVey and his friends and people like Kenneth Anger, the filmmaker, who was a good friend of his. They contained membership files and membership, and order forms for merchandise, um, news clippings, just like amazing stuff. And those boxes ended up at a research center called the Adocentin Research Center in Albany, California, right outside of Berkeley. And it's this great library, a research library, all, with all occult and UFO and esoterica and Bigfoot and all that, all of that's all the stuff that your show covers, is in this incredible library, that this couple, Don Frew and Anna Korn, run. And when I interviewed Don for the book, Don Frew, who runs this research center, he knew LaVey in the '80s, which is how I got in contact with him. And he told me he had some of these boxes. I'm like, you're kidding me. He said, come to San Francisco, or come to Albany, and you can look through them. So I booked a trip to San Francisco. I went up there and I spent 3 days just going through the boxes and essentially just copying everything on my phone. Just shooting
Yeah.
everything on my phone and bringing it home and going through it. And it just blew me away, the stuff that was there. But at the same time, I know that the Church of Satan headquarters, which is now in New York, in Poughkeepsie, I imagine that they also have some of this material or similar material, because this woman Peggy Nadramia, who is part of the is one of the heads of the organization. She writes these incredible articles about LaVey and his books and just historical Church of Satan stuff. But she has documentation, woven into these stories, which are just amazing, and they're mind blowing in their details. So she was very beneficial in helping me out, and she sent me a link to like almost every story that had ever been written about LaVey in a magazine, and it was just a phenomenal part of my research.
Yeah, that's a jackpot when you're writing about something. You get that one link where it has all the articles. That's
It came a little late though, so I was like, I was finishing up when I got it. But I have to say, just you know, when I went to San Francisco and I saw what this library had, I was just like, this is going to make the book, and it did make the book. The book would not have been nearly as good as I think it is had it not been for this, this very rare material that no one had really seen.
yeah, yeah. I mean, and that library sounds like a place that I absolutely would need to visit. But
Amazing. It is amazing. And they told me that I was the first person to do substantial research at the library. Um, so because it's pretty it's pretty new. But I was very, very happy to have that honor.
well, yeah, I mean that makes sense because I would have thought that I would have heard of it before. I mean, I had heard of Don Frew before, but I didn't know about this this research center. So
And here's how I got in contact with Don Frew. So when I was starting research on the book, I just wanted to find anybody I could who knew LaVey. That's why I got in contact with a lot of journalists who interviewed him, journalists from both professional world and the zine world, and made a lot of contacts that way. And one person led to another, and it kind of fanned out that way. But with Frew, I I used to one of my first jobs in journalism was working at a magazine called Video Review in New York, and at Video Review, one of our copy editors was a pagan, a neo-pagan, and he published his own pagan magazine. and I hadn't really been in contact with him for decades. And we were Facebook friends, and I just reached out and I said, John, do you happen to know anybody in your travels who might have had any contact with LaVey? And he's like, talk to my friend Don. and and
Yeah.
sure enough, I read up on Don, and he's like very, he's a very important person in the pagan world. And yeah, I contacted him, and he was more than happy to talk to me. And he knew LaVey intimately. He was very close with him for a number of years. And yeah, so he was great, and he was instrumental in making this book what it is.
Yeah. Yeah. Um, I mean, he seems like another one where um, it's perhaps a little bit more sacred to him than it was to Anton.
Yeah,
Because I
I
mean,
mean,
I think people need to understand that the Satanism is a bit tongue in cheek, and but also he's serious about the philosophy of it. But when you mix that with like what people would consider like Wicca or witchcraft or neo pagan ideas, that's more of a sacred kind of nature based, and it's a religion to them, and like Satanism's basically an anti-religion in a lot of ways.
yeah, it's more of a philosophy. And LaVey didn't have any use for religion, and it's fascinating to me. And one of the things that I can admit that really attracted me to writing the book was the fact that LaVey was born Jewish. And it always been hinted, and I'm a Jew. I'm an atheistic Jew, I should say.
Mm,
But LaVey had always hinted that, oh yeah, I had a little Jewish blood in my background. I also was a gypsy and from Transylvania. He had all of this going on in the background. But no, I was able to access, you know, some census documents on Ancestry.com that prove beyond a shadow of a doubt that both sides of his, you know, family, his mother and father's side, were both Russian or Ukrainian Jews. So that was something that fascinated me, that a guy who was born Jewish would, create this religion or this organization, this philosophy. And and in at the end, toward the actually in the middle and toward the end, he was very much into authoritarianism, and hung around with unsavory, fascist adjacent types. Um, so that was another kind of, weird dichotomy that I wanted to try to explore in the book as well.
yeah, I mean, like I don't know if he's directly quoting like Hitler, but there's definitely some overlap with kind of and
Yeah, he
especially when you get into the 80s and stuff. You write about like that period with Shrek's band like Radio Werewolf and Adam Parfrey being involved and throwing around like a
Lloyd Rice. Yeah,
yeah, yeah. So it's
yeah,
a hard thing to kind of square,
yeah. And it didn't just start there, because even early on, when he'd have parties where he'd have people dressed up as Nazis, at his costume parties, which is a turnoff for a number of people for obvious reasons. And um, even his first biographer, this guy Burton Wolfe, who was a church member, who wrote the biography. Uh, the devil is called The Devil's Avengers. And even in that book, he claimed that he had left the church because he saw that it was becoming this kind of crypto fascist organization. So it always was kind of a undercurrent in the church, this authoritarian, very rigid, pro-military, pro-law and order kind of sensibility. Also, there's a lot of social Darwinism, like kind of this stupid people shouldn't breed kind of mentality. Uh,
yeah,
it's an elitist organization where only the cream rises and everyone else is pond scum. So yeah, there was a lot of heavy duty kind of, you know, nastiness going on there.
Well, yeah, I think several people described him as basically being misanthropic.
Oh yeah, there's no doubt. You can be
Right.
misanthropic without being sort of denigrating toward those less fortunate than you.
Right. Yeah, I mean, he's
That was the model.
basically, you can be a misanthrope without being a eugenicist. Uh,
Exactly. There you go.
but yeah, I mean, like when I was referring to Valet's kind of like little psychological profile of him, that's kind of where he came. Is like that was kind of the moral failing of it. Is he's so misanthropic that he really just kind of thinks that that some people just don't deserve the freedoms.
Exactly. Exactly.
Yeah.
And he also was not shy about, you know, putting out his likes out there. I mean, in the Satanic Bible and the Satanic Ritual, in rituals in both of those books, in the the dedications page, originally they've since been altered and revised, but originally he like listed all of these like Nazi commanders and these Third Reich guys and
Right.
Nazi bankers as he's dedicating the books to them. So whether that was done tongue in cheek or just to get a rise out of to be provocative, who knows? But at the same time, um, in the church in the Satanic Bible, his first book, he lifted um, content from this like notorious sort of fascist Bible by Ragnar Redbeard called Might is Right, and just
Hmm.
vehemently anti-Semitic and racist, just crazy diatribes. And he actually lifted some material for his own book. So he was a complicated man.
Yeah, and I mean that's really what makes this book such a fascinating read. Apart from your writing style and the way you put it all together, I thought like I said, I had a hard time putting it down because he is a complicated figure and he does touch on so many parts of culture um, that I think especially people that listen to the show would be interested in. It's um, It seems like a lot of people try to compartmentalize their various interests, and he seemed to kind of unify it behind this mask that he wore. You know?
That was a
uh,
great summation of this guy. I mean, and that's it. It's like he created a total environment around himself where he can sort of indulge in all of the stuff that he was obsessed with. And I credited him because he was able to impart that even into his family life. I mean, his daughters were kind of involved. His partners were involved. He was a very charismatic guy, so I guess that helped. Um, but yeah, it's like to be able to sort of live your obsessions is kind of a, I don't know if it's an admirable thing, but it's I think in some respects it's an enviable position to be in.
yeah, for sure. I mean, he wasn't always living high on the hog, but he had the things that he liked around him.
That's exactly
Um,
it. Yeah, yeah.
and I think by the time Xerxes came along, he was older, kind of as a you know to be the father of a young child. But it seemed like that was kind of his happiest times too. Was
Yeah, I believe he was 63 when Xerxes was born, because Xerxes was, I think, 4 when his dad died. So, um, yeah, and Blanche was very candid with me about the relationship between, Anton and his son, and it seemed lovely. At the same time, there's always an at the same time with this guy. At the same time, I was reading this interview that LaVey and Blanche did in a zine called Ben is Dead. It's a real fun kind of feminist punk zine, and they spent a lot. The two women who interviewed them spent a lot of time with LaVey at the house, um, and LaVey was saying things to them like, Xerxes was an experiment, and we want to see if we can raise him, our own way. No television. They claim that like somebody claimed that he had no contact with other children for like his first year. So it's like LaVey had to put this kind of weird spin on it. It's like, yeah, I
Yeah.
have a baby. I'm an older guy with a baby, but you know, we're trying to experiment and do something different with this child. So it's like there's always the little kind of tweak that he has to add to it that makes you think, ooh, there's something
Yeah.
so creepy here.
Yeah. He's always got like a little touch of Dr. Phibes to
Yeah, exactly.
him. Yeah. I mean, and Xerxes, I guess, would probably be in his 30s by now, right? Is he
Yeah,
is he still around?
he is. Yeah, yeah. No, he
Okay.
changed his name. And I actually got a little shit online because I I have his name in the book. But the thing is, it's like it was easy to get this information. It's on his mother's Wikipedia page. His
Okay.
Amy goes by now, and it's been on that Wikipedia page for years, and it was also on his sister Carla's Wikipedia page, and I think it's since been removed. But there's some Church of Satan members who sort of came down on me for mentioning his current name, and I said this information is on his mom's Wikipedia page, and it will be read by way more people than will ever read this book. So I assume.
Yeah. Right.
So I,
Well,
I was just kind of taken aback by that. I mean, it was no malice intended, but yeah, I thought that was a weird kind of response to the book.
yeah. So I'm guessing he prefers the anonymity these days and doesn't really want
Yeah,
those.
I imagine so. Yeah, and yeah, no, I realize that now that yeah, yeah,
Right. Yeah. Well, it would have been nice if they were participating before. They could have told you that, but
yeah. No, but listen, I don't know. Maybe it's it's my thing as it's my instinct as a journalist. It's like it's if the information is out there and readily available and it could have been removed after all of these years, it's like, why is it still there? It's still there because it's not a big deal. So that's
yeah.
that's how I justified, including his name in the book.
Right. Yeah. I mean, it seems like a safe assumption, but
Yeah, but
but people are going to be upset no matter what you do. I think
yeah,
so.
no, and listen, I understand, but you know, I still
Yeah.
I think that people who are going to avoid the book for that reason, I think, are missing out. But then also, I think a lot of people who are maybe members of the Church of Satan, they don't want to read anything that could potentially be perceived as negative or critical of LaVey. And
Yeah.
that's something that I have to accept as an author, that not everyone is going to be into this book. Um, so
Yeah. I mean, and like, I don't think you're really critical in the sense that you're, like you said, you didn't set out to debunk all the myths or anything like that. And you do kind of leave it pretty open ended. You kind of lay out all the different accounts and stories and weave it together in this really uh well composed narrative that takes you through his whole life, and along the way you are kind of dispelling some of the myths, but a lot of them are kind of open to interpretation, and I think it's really well done the way you did it. I don't see how anybody could really take too much issue with it.
Thanks.
And
I try to make it as I tried to make it as truthful as possible, and that was my only goal. It's like to make to do a full portrait of this guy with all his, positives and all the things that he brought to this world and brought to the culture. But, with that, there's also going to be some negative stuff as well. And it's all researched and reported. It's not, I didn't make this stuff up. It's all out there. So, and getting other voices and hearing from people who had dealings with him. Some people just don't want to see their heroes, you know, see them as flawed human beings, and that's kind of what he is. He's a flawed human being.
yeah, yeah. Um, well, I think I've heaped a lot of praise on the book, but I do recommend my listeners definitely go out and find a copy because it is great. But as we're winding down here, I did want to at least get a mention in about your other book. Um, that I only found out about when buying this one. I'm like, oh man, I'm gonna have to read that at some point too. It's They Just Seem a Little Weird is the book. Yeah,
Yes, it is a book. Well, it's called They Just Seem a Little Weird. It's I have it right here, and it's how Kiss, Cheap Trick, Aerosmith, and Stars remade rock and roll. And it's a book that essentially tries to tell the story of 70s hard rock, but only through the eyes of these four bands that were very intricately uh, uh, interrelated. There was a lot of cross pollination between all four of these bands: Kiss, Cheap Trick, Aerosmith, and this smaller band called Stars, which not many people have heard of, but were they were part of the Kiss orbit. They opened for Aerosmith, um, and all of these bands like shared management. They sometimes shared producers. They shared agents and bookers and toured together and were friendly and were frenemies. And there was so much going on with these four particular bands. And the way I kind of uh, got on this this idea was that I'm a huge Kiss fan, and Kiss was my first band that I loved growing up. And when I got the Gene Simmons 1978 solo album, when Kiss did their four solo albums that were released on the same day, Gene Simmons had on his record as all these guest guitarists and guest musicians, and some of the guest guitarists were Rick Nielsen from Cheap Trick, Joe Perry from Aerosmith, and Richie Rano from Stars. So I took this album as kind of the launching pad for this story and telling the story of these four bands and how they remade rock and roll.
well, that's awesome. Yeah, I feel like I do need to read that one because I'd like to know how they're all connected because that just seemed like four bands that didn't seem on the face of it to be too connected, but
Very. And the thing about the book that I, it was a much tougher book to write than the LaVey one, because the LaVey book is pretty straightforward. I mean, it covers the entirety of this man's life. I interviewed 50 something people for it, but for the first book, it's just like the story is very complex. And I mean, I try to tell it in a way that was very coherent, and I think I've succeeded, and people have told me I succeeded. But a lot of people have sort of said that they're experiencing their experience reading the book was like one of those detective series where they put like photos on a board and they connect them connect them to other people with string and
yeah,
like
the old corkboard thing. Yeah.
and that's how they read the book. I'm like, okay, if that worked for you, but it was a fun book to write, but it was very difficult, and I interviewed like 140 people for it, so it was a very time consuming book as well.
Yeah, and I imagine, I guess I don't have to imagine too much because I do, research on larger than life figures, and I feel like for somebody like LaVey and somebody like even just Gene Simmons, will isolate one person. A rock star has the same kind of mythology built up around them, and a lot of stories that get told, and conflicting narratives and conflicting people that may have liked them, people that didn't like them, telling different stories.
Oh yeah,
Um,
there's some of that in the book. Absolutely. Yeah, it's just that's that's something that kind of comes up almost accidentally when you write books like this. It's like you have um, this perceived fact, and then you talk to two other people, and they're like, "No, no, 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 I don't know who said that." It's like he said it. It's like no, he's full of shit. So I think that's one of the reasons why I mean I love reading oral histories. Um, when you're basically reading quote after quote after quote, and people are contradicting the person who just spoke. So yeah, I love reading that as a reader, and I find it fascinating as a reporter and writer to encounter that, because it's like not everyone has their own version of the truth.
yeah. Oh yeah, that's for sure. And I think we see that more and more clearly every day.
Exactly, exactly. See, the book is timely too, so rush out and buy it.
Yeah. Okay. Well, if people do want to do that, where can they buy it? I mean,
It's available in stores, not as many stores as I had hoped. I think the easiest way to buy it is on Amazon, although I'm not a big Jeff Bezos fan right now. But yeah, you could order it from your local bookstore. It's out from Hachette Publishing. So yeah, enjoy.
wherever fine books are sold.
Yeah.
Yeah. And if people want to follow you online, where can they do that?
I'm on Facebook. I'm also on Twitter. I don't use Twitter or X, whatever the hell it's called. X. Yeah,
It's X now. Yeah.
I try to avoid that too for obvious reasons. But yeah, you can find me on X. I'm at I don't even know what my handle is. Um,
I
at Doug
think it's right.
Broad. There you go. It's easy enough. At Doug Broad.
And you're on Instagram too, I think. So
Yeah, I barely look at Instagram. I'm so bad at this stuff. You'll find me. If you're really looking for me, you're gonna find me.
yeah. Well, if you liked Twitter before, I would recommend Blue Sky. You might enjoy that because it's very
Okay.
similar, but worth checking out. But people listening right now, definitely check out Doug's books and find him online because, like I said, I mean, really, this was um, a day and a half of reading for me. I got it in the afternoon on my doorstep and started reading it. And then the next day, it's like every spare moment I got, I kept picking it back up. And then by the end of the day, I was done with the book.
I love that. I love hearing that from people who read my book, but I also love reading like that. If I get a book that's totally absorbing, I could sit and read 150 pages in a sitting. So I
Yeah,
get it.
it's nice when that happens because I mean, oftentimes, I'm reading something really dry. I'm reading like occult books from the 1800s or something that I have to stop and read footnotes and maybe get another book to help me decode it or something. So, but yeah, no, this was just a joy to read. It was joyful all the way through. So,
Uh,
all right. Well, it was great talking to you, Doug, and uh, I'm sure I'll see you somewhere on the internet. So,
Will, thank you very much. I appreciate it.
thank you. All right.